You are now listening to Comp Corner, brought to you by the law offices of Bradford and Barthel.
What is up? Welcome back to Comp Corner, episode number 5. It's your favorite defense attorney, Nasir F. Adil. Please email your podcast questions to Comp Corner. As always, our email information is in the show notes below. Later in our episode, I'll answer an email from friend of the show and fellow workers' compensation attorney, Sean M. Sean asks an interesting question about QMEs and whether it would be beneficial to return to a system where each party can obtain their own QME. A big thank you from the bottom of our Comp Corner hearts for all listeners, followers, and subscribers to our podcast. On today's episode, we have the pleasure of being joined by Manjit Bath and Kimberly Wagner. Manjit and Kimberly are both equity partners with Bradford and Barthel. Anyone who has ever worked with Kimberly and Manjit know that these two attorneys straight get things done. They have their own unique styles, which sets them apart in our industry. Kimberly, Manjit, and I discuss some distinctions in workers' comp throughout Northern California, the Central Valley, and Southern California. We talk about how they each got into comp and what drives them to succeed. It was fun getting to deep dive and explore their respective career trajectories. And of course, we get to know Manjit and Kimberly even better in America's favorite segment, 5 and 5. And on to our guests, Kimberly and Manjit. All right. Thank you to Manjit Bath and Kimberly Wagner for joining us on Comp Corner. How are you both doing?
Good, thanks. Great to be here, Naz.
Yep, doing good, thanks. And thanks for having us as a guest.
No, it's our pleasure. Thank you. And Manjit, you are the equity partner, managing attorney of the Bakersfield office and assistant managing attorney of the Fresno office. And Kimberly Wagner is equity partner, managing attorney of the Ventura office, director of the Longshore department, and equity partner in charge of ratings. Kimberly and Manjit, some topics that we wanted to discuss today was around the state of California. Obviously, it's one big, huge state with 26 WCABs and district offices. But throughout the state, we handle things a little differently based on where we are. Now, cases in Southern California tend to have different trends than we have in Northern California and Central California. But the three of us have pretty much practiced exclusively in our own regions. So we can't really go back and forth and say, hey, where's really different. But one thing that I've heard in that different offices in our firm we talk about is Northern California maybe settling less for nuisance value settlements than Southern California. Kimberly, what's your experience been with kind of nuisance value settlements of late and as well as just in general in Southern California?
The term nuisance value has really taken on, I think, a life of its own, especially in the last.
Yeah.
It is. It really is. Unfortunately, in the last 10 years, I'd say that nuisance value has at least doubled and potentially tripled. And with the people you talk to, even it's just got such a wide range. So I have been fairly fortunate to have a decent number of nuisance value settlements. In Southern California in general. I will say they tend to be a little bit trickier to enter into for a remote deposition because you do have an applicant who cannot sign immediately. So we do tend to have depositions. Even the ones that settle, they don't necessarily result in a CNR as often as they would have when we were back in person. It's obviously a lot harder to negotiate with somebody over the phone or over video, whereas when we were in person, you could just walk outside the door and have a quick chat and get the case wrapped up, and even walked through that afternoon. That's no longer an option, unfortunately. But from what I have been told, yes. And really, I have clients who have cases all over the state, and it seems to be the consensus that we do have a better chance of settling for quote unquote nuisance value in Southern California depositions for sure.
That is fair. How about Fresno? How's the settlement game in general as far as nuisance versus kind of early settlements in Central California, Manjit?
I think it's a little similar to basically what Kimberly stated, like what she experiences in Southern California. I mean, I think, it was always good, like Kimberly said, to be in person at whether it was depositions or at hearings. I mean, I think prior to COVID, I think I was settling at least 60% of my cases, and especially 60, 70% of my nuisance value denied cases at a deposition. And
Wow.
I would always have my CNR in my hand before the depot, so I would get it
Yep.
signed there and then and take it to the board the next day and get it approved. And there were cases where I would get a file. I would say within the month I was able to close out a file because I was able to get it settled. And the same thing going to a hearing, always taking a CNR with me and getting it signed and approved, at the same time. Now, obviously, it's taking longer because even if we settle at the day of the deposition, it's still taking me sometimes 6 weeks to get a CNR back from these applicants. And I'll be honest, a lot of these nuisance value cases, you see that same pattern of applicants' attorneys that file these nuisance value cases, and they're the attorneys that they basically, it's like those mills. They're just getting in all these claims, filing these applications that have no merit, and we're selling for nuisance value, but it is taking them a lot longer to get the CNRs to us.
That's so funny. It's so true, though, isn't it? It's the irony of ironies. We're all remote, so things are more efficient. But for getting things signed and settled and signed, that actually takes a little longer just because we can't just get it signed, go to the board that afternoon. We have to kind of wait till it gets electronically signed and, of course, e-file. And it doesn't take weeks. It does take days, but it is funny how that takes things longer. As far as the nuisance value, it's funny, right? I think depending on who you ask and what decade they started comping, nuisance can either be somewhere, I think, for like $200, or it could be upwards of, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, right? Is that what you've all seen, kind of the different value in the definition of nuisance has changed? Would you both agree? Manjit?
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely. I think before, nuisance to me, or getting a case to set up a nuisance, would be 5,000 to 10,000.
Yeah.
Now I think it's between, and I think Kimberly would agree, 10 to 20,000.
Ooh, right. Kimberly, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the lowest I've ever settled a case for was, I think, maybe $100, but it's been probably a decade or more since I accomplished that, was able to accomplish anything like that. I have people now saying that nuisance value is 25, 35,000.
Yeah.
Those seem to be pretty common opening demands at depositions, and you get people commenting on nuisance value now. I'll even have lien claimants, commenting on what the nuisance value of a compromise and release agreement is these days. So everyone's got their opinions for sure.
It's funny. I think that what we all learn is that the definition of nuisance changes. There's no one definition, no matter what part of the state you're in. But also, I think one thing that is important is that, we always try and settle cases at depots. I think in Northern California, we try and do that quite often, right? Every deposition that we tell attorneys is every deposition is an informal settlement conference, or it should be treated as one, because that's like a trial. Deposition is kind of the only time where all the players are at hand, right? The applicant's there, the applicant attorney's there, the defense attorney's there. One thing I've heard is that cases actually settle more at depositions in Southern California, or even in Central California, than in Northern California. But what's kind of been your experience with that, Kimberly? Cases settling at depositions in Ventura, Southern California area?
It's hard for me to compare. As you mentioned, I primarily have practiced in Southern California. But it is definitely a fairly decent, occurrence in Southern California for sure. I know I'm testing the theory that afternoon depositions are more likely to settle, particularly Friday afternoon depositions. Nobody wants to go forward with a deposition on a Friday afternoon. So now that I have set my strategy out there for the world to hear. No, but I do think people who, I do think that I think there's more incentive for there to be a settlement achieved in the afternoon.
Interesting. I'm gonna start seeing that coincidence. I like that. Thank you for that. How about you, Manjit? As far as you mentioned before, that you used to kind of settle quite a hefty amount of your cases at depots before. Have you seen that change at all through the years or through the last few years?
I think the number has decreased now. And I think the main thing is because, the applicant, in I think 80% of my cases, the applicant's at home, sometimes the applicant will be at the attorney's office, but I find that most of the time the applicant's at their house. And I think it's just not the same when the applicant's there with the attorney in their office and talking to them. But I'm still settling a good amount of cases at depots, but not as many as I was pre-COVID.
Actually, one thing I will say, we're all talking about the different definitions of what nuisance means, right? To some, it could be $200. To some, it could be $20,000. One thing that I forgot was one time I had an employer who the employer was permissively self-insured. So it was their money going towards the CNR. They actually offered at deposition a Costco gift card to the applicant as far as in exchange for signing. To no surprise, we ended up not reaching settlement, but I guess we could have one podcast alone on what's offered as far as nuisance, cash or even gift cards, right?
Good luck getting that walked through too.
Yes.
Show the judge the Costco gift card. That's hilarious. Now, what we've heard is that cases tend to settle via STIPs more in Northern California and Central California versus in Southern California. Obviously, throughout the state, it depends on whether the applicant wants to settle future medical or keep it open, settle for permanent disability or not. But any trends that you've seen of note of late, Manjit, that leads you to believe that there's a changing amount of cases settling by STIPs versus CNR in Central or in Fresno area, Bakersfield?
Actually, for me personally, to be honest, I think I personally settle more of my cases via CNR. I very rarely will settle cases via STIP. And I think a huge percentage. I would say I have over 50% of my cases are more like the ones that the client has denied, and those obviously we are gonna just settle via CNR. So yeah, me personally, I think I do way more CNRs than STIPs.
Got that Thomas finding on Thomas addenda ready to go, huh, Manjit?
Oh, definitely, yes.
How about you, Kimberly? How about in Southern California? Have you seen any changes in trends versus amounts of cases settling by STIPs versus CNR?
I wouldn't say so much changes in the trends. I think we all do see that certain types of employers do tend to prefer a STIP. Usually it tends to be the larger employers, the employers where the applicant does not want to resign.
Exactly.
Where the people are lifelong employees. Those are obviously the ones that are more inclined to STIP. And actually, the first job that I had, I worked primarily with a large employer, and I STIPed probably 98% of the cases that I settled for the first 3 years I was in work comp. So I got really valuable experience getting familiar with those STIPs. That's obviously not the case anymore. I probably CNR 90 or more % of my current cases. But I feel like it has more to do with the employer and the type of position the person's in and their work circumstances really than a regional thing, in my opinion.
No, I can see where you're coming from. Often you have longtime employees who simply want to keep their employment, and they're obviously more inclined to settle by STIPs and keep that future medical care open. Otherwise, like Manjit was saying, if you have cases where you're denied injuries, someone just got hired, you want them off the books, then obviously the employer and the carrier is going to want that to be CNR versus a STIP. So yeah, I like that. I like how you mentioned that. It's all about the employer and the type of case, not necessarily the venue or the location. But that's a very important distinction. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one thing we have noticed, I think, is differences in how part of the states handle asbestos. And I think for those of us who've handled asbestos, we know that in Northern California, we do things by the labor code, which is just based on the actual labor code itself and how to divide up decedents and the CNR amounts for asbestos cases. But in Southern California, it's actually done differently, where they actually just do it by earnings alone. So there's just a few distinctions that there are actually in practice in different parts of the state right there. Before we move on, Kimberly, Manjit, anything else that you have, in your opinion, that differentiates the states in Central, Southern, Northern to the best of either of your knowledges?
I think maybe the judges for me. I mean, I haven't practiced in Southern California, but I do hear, like from certain attorneys, because obviously we all appear remotely, and we have some attorneys in our offices that will make appearances in Southern California, and I think just the distinction of some of the judges, I think for me that would be maybe the biggest distinction, even though I haven't personally really appeared in Southern California.
No, absolutely. And it's funny, I think even throughout the state, like in different venues, right? You have some venues, I think 15 years ago when I first got started, at the time in Oakland and San Francisco, for example, a lot of the newer judges at that time back in 2010 were all former AAs. And they'd become judges, and you didn't understand differently, because it was just kind of, hey, you just had that trend. And then fast forward between like 2014 to 2024, you had a lot of former state defense attorneys from SCIF kind of they transitioned to the judge role, and that kind of shifted the judge kind of how they view things a little bit. But now I think the last year or two, you've seen that go back the other way, where you have a lot of former AAs, and you're like, man, these guys are all former AAs. Do I have any shot now in heck as far as winning at trial? But it's just a trend. That's how it goes, and that's just kind of the business, right?
Did you know Bradford and Barthel has free monthly workers' compensation webinars that provide CE and MCLE credits? Topics have included soup to nuts, such as calculating TD and PD, applying the AMA guides, defense tips for drafting CNRs and STIPs, taking effective doctor depositions, and many more. Register to attend a live event, or you can review over 100 accredited hours of recorded webinars on our training page at bradfordbarthel.com.
So one thing I wanted to ask, I think, is kind of explore both of your experiences. But in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges in workers' compensation right now? Manjit, what would you say that are some of the biggest challenges that we face in California workers' compensation currently?
I mean, I think, I think fraud continues to be, I think a big challenge. I mean, it's always been there, but I think it just continues to be more and more of an issue. And I think, sometimes when we get these cases settled for nuisance value, I think it starts like, it's kind of like, these, like just say particular applicants, because I'll see the same applicant, the same employer. So you have like coworkers that will kind of file a claim, and it's going to be one of those, nuisance value claims, and will offer, they'll settle a case for 10 or 20,000. I mean, 10 or 20,000 is a lot of money to some people. Then what happens is they're going to tell their friend, and then I think it starts that chain reaction. And I think I've seen that more so now than I did before, where you'll have the same applicant attorney, you'll have the same employer, and obviously a different applicant. So I think, and I just think the system makes it too easy for individuals to file fraudulent claims. And I think something needs to be done to kind of cartel that.
So let me ask you a follow-up, Manjit. Let's say that you kind of get the whiff of some fraudulent or possibly fraudulent activity going on. From your defense experience, what are some things that you will do to recommend that in response?
I mean, I always tell the client, we should get Sabrosa done. Obviously we can look at prior claims and whether this person has a history of filing claims, because I know I've seen many a times you'll do that case search and there might be this individual has filed 4 or 5 claims, and then I will tell my adjuster, we can settle now and offer them 10 or 20, but we're going to continue, that trend of now, once they've gotten this settlement, now they're going to go and do the same thing to another employer. So, in that case, I encourage that maybe we do want to take the next steps and maybe look into prosecute for fraud. So I think we should be a little bit more aggressive. Like sometimes I know for clients it's easier to offer that 10, 20,000 just to close a file. But I think sometimes in the bigger picture, because now they're going to go do the same thing to another employer.
Sure. And word travels fast. If you have a big employer, and if the employer is offering, 10 or 15,000 to everyone who gets injured off the bat, then of course word travels, right? Employers are like little middle schools. Word travels fast, right? Same thing with employers, right? Word travels quickly. So I think stay aggressive, recommend, hey, look, there's obviously benefit to closing out a file, but there's also benefits sometimes of being aggressive and saying, look, we're going to call you out on nonsense, and be aggressive. Take you to AOE, COE trial and force a judge to kind of call out an injured worker who doesn't really have their record straight. Now, thank you for that. How about you, Kimberly? What are some of the bigger challenges you see in workers' comp right now?
I think one of the biggest issues we're facing right now is costs. We've been seeing the increase in the med legal fee schedule, just in costs in general. Ironically, not any permanent disability increases for the applicant over the last 10 years, but doctors are getting paid more, applicants' attorneys are getting paid more for 5710 fees. Interpreters are charging more than attorneys are to go to appearances, and I think that those costs are troubling, to say the least. That's, I think that's something that could be combated by implementing stricter and more more specific fee schedules, right? I
Mm,
think that
yeah.
there was advisement that the administrative director come up with fee schedules for things like 5710 fees, for interpreting
Yeah.
costs, things like that. I think that could really help control those costs. So you don't have as much of a demand for things like market rate. It makes it really hard to predict what the costs associated with a claim are going to be. I've
Yeah.
even seen a huge increase lately in court reporter fees.
Yeah.
So I think that has really introduced an unprecedented instability to what we do and to our ability to estimate how much these workers' compensation cases are going to cost to litigate
Sure.
and to go through the discovery process. The other thing I think is we've really been seeing the WCAB, I think, trend heavily towards the applicant's bar in the last,
Yeah.
particularly in the last 5 years or so.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think we can generally predict that we're probably not going to see a very favorable decision if it's a pretty contentious issue. So occasionally I'll even tell a client, hey, if you want to take this to trial, if you want to file a petition for recon, we will probably end up having to file a writ if you really want to fight this and you really
Sure.
want a final decision on this. So seeking those higher level appellate decisions on some of these cases is introducing that extra level of litigation as well. And I'm a big fan of bright line rules. I think there's
Mm-hmm.
been a lot of exceptions and loopholes that have been carved out in the interest of providing benefits to applicants. And it's not that I don't think applicants should receive benefits that they're entitled to, but I think it's
Sure.
important to have those rules in place that we can predict and we can follow so that we know where the cases are supposed to go. We know how benefits are supposed to be administered. And by trying to make exceptions in order to get applicants benefits, it's made things a lot more unpredictable.
No, that's a great answer. And if we had a crystal ball and if you could predict or if could desire, one or two or three fee schedules to be set out, what areas do you think we'd all benefit to have firm, clear-cut fee schedules in?
5710 fees is a big thing for me.
Sure.
I
Sure.
get a lot of requests for hourly rates that I think are on the high side. My opinion is that the doctors have a fee schedule rate of $455 per hour for depositions.
Hmm.
Why should an applicant's attorney be paid more than that to not be
Yeah.
deposed and to simply be there to represent their clients? So I think, though, that having a clearer cut fee schedule for something like that would decrease a lot of litigation, decrease a lot of unnecessary costs, inconsistent results, um, you know, potentially reduce some leverage in the course of negotiations that probably should not be there because it could
Yeah.
potentially prejudice the applicants if we're quibbling over 5710 fees instead of focusing on settling their cases. Interpreter fees, again, is a big one. I think that there should be a fee schedule for that. The amount of litigation over market rate is ridiculous. The amount of discovery that really should go into determining what that actual market rate is enormous and cumbersome to the extent that I don't think it's really done correctly to figure out what the right market rate is. And we often get railroaded by these exorbitant
Oh, yeah.
fees that nobody wants to spend, $2,000 litigating over a difference of 200.
Exactly. And the 5710 memo, for example, for AA fees in the Bay Area, it's like about 15 years old. I think it might be 15, 17 years old. So, of course, you have AA saying, hey, I need to be paid at a higher rate because, sheesh, I don't know if you looked around more, but the cost of everything has gone up since 2007, 2008, right? Why should it their fees? Or that's what they're arguing. I think that's totally true. I love your idea about fee schedule for professionals. I think the next time you hear a doctor complaining about their fee schedule will be the first time because they know no one's going to listen, right? Hey doctor, you get paid by what the fee schedule says, and you may think you're worth more, but guess what? Fee schedule don't lie. That's just the truth right there. So I love that idea. And as a follow up to both of you, some things that we've seen kind of trends in the state being brought up to our defense side is how there's an increase in the amount of panels that are being sought throughout the state. I think before the panel rules changed, before 1/113, where you could get a psych panel for every alleged compensable consequence. Post 1/113, we cannot do that anymore. It has to be an actual reason for most psych panels, and that kind of helped for a few years, right? You avoided the additional panels, but I think now, to no surprise, we've seen kind of a start to have an uptick as far as the number of panels. Have you all seen that in your venues as well? Manjit, have you seen that in Fresno, Bakersfield area?
I mean, I think there has been somewhat of an increased trend, and I think psych has been the biggest one.
Okay.
that I've seen. I would say the last year or so, I see applicants, attorneys filing applications in addition to the ortho, the add-in psych.
You've seen that. Okay. How about you, Kimberly? In Ventura, Southern California, have you seen an uptick in the amount of panels being requested?
Oh, definitely. This may sound a bit cynical defense attorney on my part, but it almost seems
No.
it almost seems sometimes like the work comp process is basically replacing personal health care. If you can just
Mm.
ask for an additional panel in any specialty you want to see if you have diabetes, to see if you have hypertension, because you don't want to pay your own healthcare premiums, or if you don't have health insurance, what better way than to just add it to your work comp claim and go see 2, 3, 4 doctors with various opinions on whether you have these conditions and potentially get paid for them. So I do
Sure.
think there's been an incentive for that. And, and again, maybe this is my cynicism, but I think the world overall, a lot of people they're a little more stressed now than they used to be. I think, COVID still weighs on us a little bit. And I think
Yeah.
people in general are still feeling that. So I think that is part of the reason that we're seeing a lot of these increased psych claims as well, regardless of the fact that these people don't get compensable PD if it's part of their physical injury.
Absolutely. And another irony is that change by the legislature doesn't take into effect until there's some type of abuse in how everything's done. And unfortunately, that's what led, well, fortunately and unfortunately, right? Unfortunately, it was an abuse in additional panels that led to the 1113 change in the labor code. And that was a fortunate change. But unfortunately, the current abuse of amount of panels is probably what's going to lead to in the future the change it by the legislature and how they're going to govern that. So it is funny how it does, the trends do change, but only after you have one side kind of taking a big advantage of it. Now, I guess another irony is that when both of you first started workers' compensation, is it correct that neither of you had any prior workers' compensation experience? Kimberly, is that correct when you first started comp that you just kind of went blindly in?
Not only did I not have any experience, I didn't even know what it was. In fact, when I went in for my interview for my first work comp job, I thought I was interviewing for a position as a criminal defense / family law attorney, only to learn that the practitioner did mostly workers' compensation. And when he asked if I knew what that was, I had to honestly answer, no, I have no clue what that is.
I say the honesty doesn't lose right there. That's perfect. How about you, Manjit? Is it correct that when you first started comp, you two were completely new to the game?
Yep, same as Kimberly. Had no idea what workers' comp law was, and I think before my interview, I did a little research, read up on what it was, and there I went to the interview, and I got the job.
It's funny. I think in the state, it is the most one of the biggest trending markets in the state is workers' comp, and that's just because obviously there's different employers that need to have people representing them and their interests. But that is something we talked about in past podcasts is that, hey, if you talk to people outside of comp and outside of law and outside of claims, they're like, well, you studied workers' compensation in law school, right? You're like, no, sorry. They didn't quite study comp and law. They're like, oh, yeah, but it was on the bar exam, right? You're like, nope. So most of us are, we're learning comp in the game, and that's fine. I mean, it's a nice area to learn. That's the beauty of admin law, right? That you get to become an expert in just kind of by practicing. And that's the fun part of it. So thank you for your candor on that one. Here on Comp Corner, it's been exciting to communicate with the workers' compensation community. When your question is read aloud on an episode, our client relations team will be sure to send over some merch as a thank you for reaching out. Comp attorney Sean M. asks, would it be beneficial to return to the old system where each party can obtain their own QME? Would that be better for one side or the other? It seems there is so much litigation involved in panel fights. Would that tend to cut down or increase litigation? Excellent questions, Sean. In my honest and humble opinion, the current system has been a winner. Does each side always get the panel specialty they desire? No. But if you know how to timely object and how to timely and properly request a panel, then more times than not, you'll probably get your preferred specialty. Currently, the online process is a purely race statute. If you're first to request a panel, you prevail. If you're second, you lose. There's almost nothing to litigate. This has severely cut back on litigation at the WCAB level. Personally, I used to be at the board multiple times per month arguing over panel defects. In hindsight, that was a tedious way of doing things, and it slowed down file closure for the applicant and the insurance carrier. Another drawback of dueling QMEs is it doubles the cost of med legal evaluations in every single case. The current system is not perfect. Few things in law and few things in comp are. But the current QME system is here to stay because, one, it's proven to promote judicial efficiency across the board, and two, overall, it's been far more cost effective. Thank you to Sean for listening and submitting. And now back to our guests, Kimberly and Manjit. Now, I want to talk about some of the personal achievements that you both have achieved. You both have been in with the firm for quite some time, respectively, and you've obviously reached a high status in the firm, and you're both well renowned throughout the industry as far as being industry leaders. But as from a personal and professional achievement perspective, what are some of the achievements that each of you are most proud of? Kimberly, how about you first?
I'd have to say it's my two little ones. I've got a son and a daughter, and I couldn't be happier to be a mom. That's the most important thing in my life, for sure.
Beautiful answer. How old are your children? If you don't mind
2
me
and
asking.
4. No, 2 and 4 years old. They keep us on our toes, for sure.
2 and 4. That's a lot of free time on your hands then, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I have a 14 and 11-year-old, both girls, and ironically, they both call me bruh more than they do dad. So I guess give it some time. If you're not called bruh or breh or some variation of bruh, it's only a matter of time, Kimberly. When they do, either your beautiful 2 or 4-year-old calls you bruh for the first time, just remember this podcast conversation, okay?
My 4-year-old calls us dude. My 2-year-old calls us dear or sweetheart.
Ooh.
Oh.
I like that. Classy. How about you, Manjit? What are some one or few achievements that you're the most proud of through your career and through your personal achievements?
Okay, so I'll do my personal, obviously, like Kimberly, my kids, I have a 21-year-old and a 23-year-old. I have 2 boys, and obviously, yeah, they're doing well. So I am very proud of them. And I think on a more of a professional standpoint, I think so. I actually was born in England. I went to law school in England, and then I moved to California, and then I self-studied and I took the California bar exam. So I think being able to, I mean, it wasn't easy, but I think being able to actually pass the bar exams when I thought it was such a huge goal to achieve, and the fact that I achieved it, I think career-wise, I think that is one of my biggest achievements.
Absolutely. It's funny. I remember when I first passed the bar, was going to pass the bar. I remember a lot of attorneys at the time, they told me that, and they told me this across the board, was their biggest achievements in law even was 2 things. One is that when they first passed their first year of law school, they were all on cloud 9. And the second thing they always said was they passed the bar. And it's attorneys who practice for decades. That's 2 of the answers that each of them gave. And here I am a few decades later. That's absolutely true. Is so those 2 experiences, they really are the highlights of our careers. It's just getting past that first year of hell, torture, whatever you want to call it, and then passing the bar exam in the most difficult state. Those are 2 highs that really can't be trumped in a lot of ways. Thank you for sharing what you both are proud of. That's super appreciated. Now, for each of you, can you guys both give one piece of advice that has stuck with you through the years of your practice and your achievements? How about you, Manjit? What's one piece of advice that stuck with you along the way?
This is something I always tell my kids. I always tell them, basically, with hard work and determination, anything's possible. And I always use myself as a prime example of, going to law school in England and then moving here, and obviously studying and passing the bar on my own, and especially when my kids were younger. And then, so that's one example. And then my other example is, as we've talked about, I love acting and going to Hollywood. And I tell them, hey, if there's something that you really want and you have a passion for, you should do it, because anything's possible. Never say never.
Nope, we'll get into that. We'll get into part 2 of that answer shortly. But how about you, Kimberly? What's one piece of advice that has stuck with you through the years in your personal journey?
Always assume everything that you put in writing can and will be read by a judge. I think it's so important to behave professionally with each other. especially in writing. So much of our communication these days is in writing, and it's so easy to just fire off an email when you're upset with somebody. But
Yeah.
I think it's important to take a step back and to make sure that what you've written is not going to be misinterpreted or is not aimed at being punitive. We don't need to be disparaging each other. And I think it's important to keep things professional and make sure you're not making yourself look bad just by being
Yeah.
upset or, vindictive.
No, that's great advice from both of you. I think one thing I was trained of is, hey, remember that attorneys are counselors. So when you counsel, you need to be a counselor to your client, but we're also human beings, right? So another piece of advice that I learned was, hey, look, if you get an email that you're not happy with or a text, and if you're not in the right frame of mind to give a good answer, then you got to sleep on it. And then if that's not enough, you have to have it reviewed by someone else, because I mean, it happens in our industry, right? We have professionals who are not easy to deal with sometimes, and you want to just write back the first thing that's on your mind. Then you take a step back and you're like, look, is this something that I'm proud of? Probably not. Let me rephrase it. Because like you said, Kimberly, if it's in writing, hey, it can go online. Any of this stuff is producible, especially if you're writing a brief or writing emails to professionals or clients. Anything's producible. You want to be professional, and that's something that we all hold ourselves in high regards to. So I appreciate both of your answers. Thank you for that. Now, Manjit, you alluded to this answer already, but what's something that most people don't know about you, Manjit? Please go ahead.
I love acting. If I wasn't a lawyer, I think I'd be down in Hollywood acting.
Nice. Anything else that we can learn about you? Let's say if we ended up playing Monopoly with you, how would that go?
Well, you know what? I think I would win. Come on, Nasir. I'm
There we go.
very competitive. And then, so just because I would say 90% of the time, well, especially when my kids were little and we would play a lot of board games, 90% of the time I would win. So then I was given the name cheater. They think because I win all the time, I'm a cheater. And I'm like, well, it doesn't work that way.
You're better than me. I was actually playing my 14-year-old this weekend at one of those giant Connect 4 games at like a boba shop, and she had me beat. I mean, she plays this stuff online. She's smarter than me. It doesn't take much. She had me dead in my sights, right? She had 3 reds lined up on each side, ready for that 4th into kill shot. But of course, what do? Do I accept my loss with grace? Heck no. I happened to jump ahead and I trip over my foot. And of course, that caused me to make sure that nobody wins. Because if I go down, we all go down.
Bad loser.
Oh, yeah. Proud of it, right? So what are some misconceptions about workers' compensation that you all feel that are out there? And, there's a few, right? We talked in the past podcast where, people outside of comp, they think, oh, everyone in comp is committing fraud. We realize, no, not everyone out there is committing fraud, right? But for each of you, what are some misconceptions that you believe are out there? Kimberly, what do you think?
I think a lot of people think that workers' compensation is not real law because it's administrative law.
Sure.
I consider myself to be a litigator. I spend a lot of time in court. I spend a lot of time in depositions. If there's only 2 types of attorneys, a contract attorney or a litigator, we're certainly litigators.
Sure.
It's a lot of hard work, and there's a lot of nuance to workers' compensation I think a lot of people don't appreciate. I heard Don and Tom talking about how much the labor code has grown when you sat down with them, and that's absolutely true. It's just gotten so much more difficult, really, to navigate those intricacies of workers' compensation over the last few years. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate that.
I love that answer. That's so true. I think the labor code wouldn't be as thick as it is if it wasn't for the actual law being applied. So no, absolutely. Thank you for that. Lastly, one thing that we ask all our guests, because it kind of gives us something to look forward to and also turns things full circle, is where we see workers' compensation in 2050. I love asking this question because it makes me think. I love getting people's responses, and it causes me to ponder sometimes where we are headed. But in the next 25 years or so, where do you think workers' compensation will be? Manjit?
I mean, I think AI is going to play a big vital role in, which is kind of starting to do, but I'm thinking and hoping with AI, I think it's going to be a better way of detecting like fraudulent claims. I think it's going to help the claims administrators kind of monitor their claims. And I think hopefully it'll just make the system a lot easier for everyone.
I like that answer. I mean, AI doesn't need to be this evil unknown, right? Maybe it can help us out and make things easier for us. So if AI is there to make us more efficient and more productive, then who's not all for it, right? Thank you for that
Definitely.
answer. Kimberly, how about you? Well, where do you see workers' comp in, let's say, the next 25 years, 2050?
There's a theory that workers' compensation undergoes a legislative shift every 8 to 10
Ooh,
years. We had one in
yeah.
1997, 2005, 2013. We are long past due for a major legislative shift. Um, and it seems that the legislation tends to pull us back a little bit from that brink of going a little too far in favor of providing benefits. So, we're at least 4 years past due at this point.
Interesting.
Maybe this is wishful thinking, but maybe seeing some defense-friendly bills and legislation. It'd be nice to help us streamline the process, sort of like what I was talking about earlier with the fee schedules, things and tools to make our practice a little bit easier on things that can just be not put on autopilot necessarily, but
Right.
that can be
Right.
streamlined and require a little less litigation so we can focus on the things that are more important and the more nuanced and more difficult parts of the practice. So
I
that's
love
my
that answer.
hope, but
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. No, I love that answer because when the law does change, it does kind of keeps all parties on the same path, right? We're no longer wondering what areas of law don't have answers in because we're supposed to be given more guidance. But I think full circle, I think shifting legislature, shifting tectonics, it's the one state in California that there's always some kind of shift that's pending down the line. My personal favorite part of Comp Corner is getting to know our guests a little better. And there is no way better than to ask 5-ish questions in 5-ish minutes. First question. What was your first job? Manjit?
Actually, my first job was working in a bank when I was still in college.
What position were you there?
Actually, I was a teller. Oh, sorry, and that was it was in England. And actually, now I just remembered my parents used to own a grocery store in England, one of those little convenience stores. So I actually started working there from like the age of 12.
Oh, nice. Family business, first start, right?
Yep.
Entrepreneurship right there.
Yeah, there you go.
And Kimberly, what was your first job?
I guess it depends on the definition of job, right? We're lawyers, so we have to define everything. So I suppose if it was the first time I ever worked for money, same kind of thing as Manjit. I worked for my dad's business, answering phones, filing papers, things like that, but mostly reading a book all day.
It's funny, our parents got a lot of free child labor out of their children, didn't they?
They sure did.
In my first job, I don't want to show off, but my first job, well, I don't want to be that guy, but I was in the pizza industry. My first job, JT McCart's Pizza in Fremont, California. Shout out. It's no longer around actually, but my junior year in high school, my first job, minimum wage was $4.25 back in 1995, and I thought I was a big shot. Why? Because I earned not $4.25, but I earned $4.50.
Wow.
That's right. That extra quarter, I thought I was the man, but
Big
soon
money.
you learned out taxes catch up to all of us, right? All right, great job. Now, second question. What would you rather have? Your own personal maid or your own personal chef? Kimberly, go ahead.
Maid, absolutely. I love to cook. I love to cook. So I'd cook for myself all day and then she could clean up after me or he or whomever.
Interesting. Okay. Interesting. I know my answer, but before I go into my clear dissension and disagreement with Kimberly, I'll let you go, Manjit. What's your answer? Would you rather have a personal maid or a personal chef?
Mine's a personal chef because I actually love to clean. I'm a clean freak, so I don't like to cook as much. So yeah, definitely a chef.
Interesting. Okay, so hold on. I have to go back for a second. Since you do love cooking, Kimberly, what are your favorites and what is your kind of go-to as far as cooking and culinary wise?
I like to cook anything my kids will eat first and foremost. Um, I think for me it's more about what I like to eat so much or more so than what I like to actually cook. Right now I'm really enjoying my Traeger pellet grill that I got for Mother's Day a few years ago. So playing with that a little bit, making a bit of a foray into hamburgers right now, in particular, Juicy Lucy's. Get that cheese in the middle, nice and
Oh
melty.
yeah, nice. And shout out to George Foreman. He was my first personal chef. Actually, he did pass away. Which who thought that with such a great career as an athlete, he actually might be more famously known for his chef for his Foreman grill, right? Who thought that would be the case? And Manjit, did I hear that you love to cook? I'm sorry, you love to clean. Is that correct?
I do. I do. I love to clean. There's nothing like a clean house, a clean and organized house.
That is true, but I'm sorry. For me personally, I would take my personal chef just because if I could have someone that cook and wash the dishes every day for me and just take that off my plate, whew, that would be a game changer for forever. That's for sure. But thank you for that. Now, third question. If you each could see one movie again, but for the very first time, what would it be? Manjit?
One movie. Well, that's a tricky question, but I think, well, you know what? I remember Titanic was the first movie that I remember watching in a movie theater. And I think, gosh, I was maybe, I hate to say it, maybe 14 or 15, because, going back in those days, I don't remember even going to the movie. So I think I'd just to go back and remember that experience of watching the movie in a movie theater. I think it would definitely be Titanic, and it was obviously an amazing movie.
Great answer. Great answer. It's an all-timer, right? For sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Kimberly, how about you? What if you could go back and see one movie again, but for the first time, what would it be?
I had sort of a similar experience to Manjit with this one. I wandered into a movie theater with a friend when I was young teens, and we had never heard of this movie. And I walked in and I absolutely loved it. I would watch The Count of Monte Cristo.
Ooh,
Um,
classic.
yeah, it really got me into classic literature and just a great appreciation. And I love the story. It's a great story.
So you both gave quite eloquent answers, which, of course, we would expect nothing less from either of you. But I would say Pulp Fiction. I know it's quite different from your answers, but Pulp Fiction, it was kind of one of its kind, and it still, I think, transcends three decades later. It came out in '95. It's still one of the best movies, in my opinion, of all time. Fourth question: what is the most famous person either of you have met? Kimberly?
Oh, that's okay. When you say met, are we talking seen or actually engaged with?
Let's go scene. How about that? Let's go with that.
Then I'd probably have to say Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Okay. How about which one have you actually met?
Um, Phil Buckman. He did
Oh.
the commercials for Carl's Jr. and he
Ooh.
was the bassist for the band Filter. We had a fun chat once in Calabasas when I was in law school at a bar, and
Nice.
that was an interesting evening.
If it isn't all over the what's the slogan?
If it doesn't get all over your face, if it doesn't get all over the place, it doesn't belong in your face.
Damn. Hey,
That
worked.
guy.
If we still know it decades later, it he must have known what he's doing, right?
I guess so.
Right. Manjit, how about you? Who is the most famous person you have met?
Well, Nasir, I've actually met a lot of famous people just because I do a lot of background work on TV.
There we go.
Yep, and then I've actually been to the Grammys. I went to the Grammys just recently last month as a seat filler. So I got to meet a lot of the famous singers, like Taylor Swift was literally just feet away from me. So, but in terms of talking, I actually remember meeting Henry Winkler. We were in San Francisco one Christmas, and we actually met him, and I actually took a picture with him, and I had a little quick conversation with him.
I think it's the great Henry Winkler. And for those listening in, including our guests, I think that's the first time Taylor Swift and Henry Winkler, aka the Fonz, have ever been said in the same sentence or within 3 sentences of each other. So, Manjit, I have to ask, what other shows have you been a background or filler in besides the Grammys and something else?
I've done Grey's Anatomy. I've done about 3 different episodes. I've done How to Get Away with Murder. So obviously that was aired. I would say maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I've done Never Have I Ever. I've done a couple of shows of NCIS.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Fifth question here. Do you prefer to stay in a hotel or in an Airbnb? Manjit?
Definitely an Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the space, you have a kitchen, and obviously if you're with your family, I think sometimes in a hotel room, we all love our family, but I think, after a few days, I think sometimes people just get a little tired of one another. So I think having an Airbnb is nice because everyone can, you can have their own rooms. There's space for the kids to go watch TV and do things. And I mean, for me, the biggest thing is, even though I'm not big on cooking, it is nice to have a kitchen, to make, snacks and teas, drinks and stuff like that.
And you like to clean, so you can more space for you to clean.
There you go. Yes. So I don't miss cleaning. Yes. So then I don't feel homesick.
Of course. How about you, Kimberly? Where would you prefer to stay, in a hotel or Airbnb?
I think I'd prefer to stay in a hotel just from my personal experiences with an Airbnb. Some of them haven't been that great. And so,
Yeah.
with a hotel, you know what you're getting. Sort of the opposite with Manjit. I don't want to feel like I have to clean up after myself before I leave or, be dinged some kind of penalty. And actually also the opposite of Manjit, having having room service and not having to cook for myself, even though I love to cook, getting that break and having everything done for me. I love that.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answers, of course, during 5 and 5, but sorry, Manjit, Airbnb, sorry, I would go to a hotel all day. I don't want to wash my own dishes. I don't want to have anyone else in the house. It's funny because one time we stayed in Airbnb out of the United States, and I guess there's different rules and regulations for Airbnbs outside the US. What I mean is, you first get to an Airbnb and, you kind of search around the house. That's kind of the fun, right? You see the rooms, the bathrooms, the deck space, whatever. So I'm going up the Airbnb, checking it out. All of a sudden, there's like this mini basement. I'm like, oh, let's check out the mini basement. In the back of my head, I'm like, hey, what if there's someone down here? I go to open the door, and guess what? The door is locked, and I heard someone say, hello? I go running back upstairs. Let's just say that you learn that in other countries, their Airbnb rules are different. The owners can stay like in the attachment. It's a weird situation, but I guess I've been traumatized by that. And plus I hate washing dishes. So for me, it's a hotel every day. So hopefully Airbnb is not a client of ours, but if they are, we apologize, Airbnb. Now, since you both did fantastic on the first 5 and 5 questions, we all get a bonus, if that's okay with you all.
Sure.
If I visited your city, where is the first place you would take me? Kimberly, in Ventura or the Ventura area, what would you recommend?
The beach.
Ooh.
Why not, right? We're
Easy
lucky.
answer.
We're lucky. The beach is about a mile or two from our office, and it's never crowded. Although maybe it will be with our vast B&B podcast audience swarming to Ventura Beach. But no, it's great to have that release and that relaxation so close to the office, and just that little mini getaway that's sort of a locals only type of place.
Easy answer. Well done. And Manjit, how about you? If I visited your city, Fresno, Bakersfield area, Central California, where's the first place you would take me?
Well, unfortunately, we're not as lucky as Kimberly to have a beach, a mile away. We're literally surrounded by farmland, great vineyards, and, different almond orchards. I mean, the closest I would say I would take you to Yosemite, which is about just over an hour from Fresno, but it's, not per se Fresno, but, there's plenty of good restaurants to eat in Fresno. So I think I'd just take you out for a nice meal.
Nothing wrong with that. I think the beauty of California, right? No matter Northern California, Central California, Southern California, there's plenty of gorgeous areas. So shout out to the beautiful state. And thank you both for your time today. You were both amazing. Can't thank you enough. Hopefully we can have you both on in the future again.
Sure. Thanks, Nasir.
Thank you. Thank you to Amir Riabi and Tammy Welty for producing today's Comp Corner episode. Please email Comp Corner with your questions. Our email address can be found in the show notes. Special thank yous to Manjit Bath and Kimberly Wagner for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you all next time on Comp Corner.